So I get alerts, Eamon, on my from Google every day, and it's Irish arrested. Like those two words, when they're in a news story, I get an alert. And
giving away your trade secrets now.
I'm giving away my trade secrets, right? But one of them that pops up constantly is Irishman arrested as part of what's called in the US the travelling conman fraud groups. And it happens probably once a month for the last year. We've had these Irish citizens, some of them joint citizens of the UK and Ireland, being picked up in America, mostly for these home repair scams. But we had a major one, a major arrest in the US as well, in connection with the same allegation.
Yeah, unfortunately, I haven't been able to figure out exactly who it is just yet. Yeah. But there's this couple. Now, they were basically picked up by the US ICE, which stands for Immigration and Customs Enforcement.
Yeah.
So they have different units involved in that, and they have, I think, enforcement and removal operations, so the ERO. So I just thought I'd explain them because just be easier to refer to them as the New York ERO.
Yeah.
Anyway, picked up this couple, but they were actually both already in custody. She had been arrested by police in Kingston in New York, for possession of stolen goods. And then they always run these things now through Homeland Security to see if there's warrants out for people. And the husband had actually been arrested the previous year, and he was in for an assault or a similar thing in a different part of the country. And so the two of them were then arrested, I think, on just around the 12th of July, and they're now in detention, awaiting to go before a federal judge who's going to decide whether or not they should be sent back. But they also mentioned that they're actually wanted on 19 charges of money laundering in connection with defrauding a number of people, allegedly in the UK, worth 3 million sterling, about 3.5 million euro.
Yeah.
So it's quite a serious amount of money. It's a fairly hefty case.
Yeah, and we've seen it's not just them alone. There's a guy called Matthew McDonough who's facing allegations that he's carried out frauds of up to $500,000 in the Seattle area, and that was only last month. So what do we know about what's called the travelling conman fraud gangs, and is it more common than ever, or it's just because of Google alerts?
I'd say it's Google alerts doing its best for you in that sense. I think there's also an element of some of these UK-based fraudsters and Irish-based fraudsters are, they're running out of road in certain countries at certain times of the year.
No pun intended.
And no pun intended at all.
Yeah.
But there have been for years, Irish clan-based gangs who have been travelling to the US, and they've always been around. I mean, myself and Liam O'Connor, the photographer, we travelled to the US in 2004, I think, on the Sunday World, and we interviewed a couple of people in near Fort Worth in Texas, and they were like 6th and 7th generation Irish who were like involved. I think we were trying to contact somebody called Marilyn Toogood, and her husband Johnny. They were involved in quite a famous case in South Bend, in Indiana, in which I think she was kind of ended up being called the monster mum because she was seen thumping the small toddler because they interrupted a shoplifting expedition.
Right.
Basically, the toddler drew attention to them, and to kind of ruin the expedition. But since then, I suppose, even if you remember, there was we covered a case then as well of a wedding in Newburgh in New York that Aaron Brady at the time when he was on the run, and I think this is in 2003, and that was a wedding again. These were people that he was connected to, involved in doing driveway work and all the rest.
Yeah.
And because I remember at the time wondering, how does a guy in his early 20s or even younger, I think it was, what was he, 20, 21 at the time on the run, how do they support themselves while on the run in a place like the US? But they had immediate connections, and some of these people who would now be, to use the American term, members of an Irish traveller conman fraud group, that he would have had connections with, with members of people who are operating in that regard now.
So what is the modus operandi? What are they like? Because we hear the sort of details of it, but they're quite similar in how they
it's the exact same thing. It's knocking on doors, we can do a really good price. And I mean, they're quite sophisticated. I mean, we had we've had stuff recently about them in Canada and Australia, like just this year as well. And it's this same modus operandi. Like, I mean, they'll stick up a Facebook page or a website. Anyone can do a cheap website now, and they'll put up bogey testimonials and knock on doors, and they'll find people to do their driveway and take as much money as they can and do as little work as possible. And that's what they do. And they're prolific at it, and they've been doing it for years and years.
And it's also this home improvements thing as well, where they, one of the ones I read recently, I don't know if you wrote it, was where they offer to do somebody's roof. They get onto the roof then and sort of make it far, far worse. And then say you need to spend 100,000 getting this done. We're after finding this.
And I mean, and some of it's pretty cruel. Like, I mean, they will try to target vulnerable people, or go for elderly people, and they'll find an area or a neighbourhood or whatever, or an estate in Ireland where people who all bought their house 30, 40 years ago and are getting on a bit, and but might have a few savings that they can target. I mean, they're highly organised and quite clever, and the information is passed around about where possible targets might be.
Yeah.
But in terms of the US, like, I mean, they've come up with Homeland Security in a number of cases where people have been caught trying to get into the States, and we got a great insight recently in one case.
Yeah.
Where there was a guy arrested in Miami, and he had actually come from. He's an Irish national.
Yeah.
Who had come in over the border in Mexico and had been picked up by Border Patrol or whoever it was, and they put a bracelet on him, an ankle bracelet, and he went on to some place in Chicago or Illinois, and he then travelled from there to Florida because they were trying to hand over money to a guy with a boat who was going to travel to the Bahamas island of Bimini, where a relative and others had been stuck for a number of months trying to get from there to get a lift over to the States, 60 kilometers across the ocean to get into the States. And they were paying $60,000. Like, it's not small. And that was just earlier this year that happened. So it was interesting to get a kind of an insight. Now, there was 12 people set up for this one. Yeah. And there was 2 people involved and on the kind of the American side, two Irish people. And this guy, obviously, who'd come in via Mexico, had travelled down to hand over the money to the boatman, who in fact actually was a confidential informant working for the American authorities. So they got the whole thing pretty much nailed down. So that's a waiting to see if that'll pop up. Unfortunately, ICE are not very forthcoming with handing out details to journalists. Let us know when courts are.
There was a great TikTok video, and you don't know with these. We didn't actually do anything on it because you can't be sure with TikTok, but they had Irish guys trying to climb over Donald Trump's wall from Mexico to get into the US, which was really unusual to hear the Irish accents, because they have been a number of cases where ICE, which are kind of an elite force, I suppose, of border agents, very controversial at times. And I think there was another case somewhere down near Nevada where there was 30, 40 people picked up illegal migrants, all from, Central America and South America, except for the odd Irishman in the middle. There was 40 or 50 people.
Yeah.
So it is an unusual phenomenon. I mean, there have been a number of deportations, and there's a number of people currently facing charges as well.
Yeah, I mean, there's a couple of others more recently deported back, but as far as we understand now, they're facing charges in this country, so we can't really get into that.
It's actually up the north, but there was a couple of brothers extradited, wasn't there?
Yeah, there was.
Yeah.
And of course, then I suppose the best known one for us would have been Andy Cockwall, who was part of the infamous burglary gang in Ireland. And I think it was back in 2018. He was one of these people that ICE released a photograph of him with his back to the camera, handcuffed at the steps of the plane, been sent back to Ireland, having overstayed his visa. He wasn't facing any criminal charges at that stage, but he certainly, himself and his wife, had been the target of the Criminal Assets Bureau over the years. The money that they'd made from the criminal activity involved in burglary and all the rest. And even, I suppose, with immigration becoming such a politicized issue as well, I suppose we're kind of looking out. And you're always looking at these stories, and so it is unusual when you have a group of people like from the UK or from Ireland who are suddenly these illegal boat people. I mean, so we had it again. It was the same island of Bimini where a boat had left, and this is in August 2022, so it was 2 years ago. They stopped a boat at sea, And there were 6 on board that were from the United Kingdom and 2 who were from Ireland. Now, as far as we understand, all 8 of them were actually, they're pretty much Irish connected. And they had basically got the GPS of the boat, and it showed that this guy had set off from a marina in Miami that morning and had gone out to Bimini and pick up these guys. So it is a route for, I suppose, the more well-heeled immigrant or people who can afford that price. I mean, it seems to be it's a fair amount of money, like in terms of how much they're paying. But I guess it's safer than trying to climb over a wall and taking your chances in the Rio Grande or making that desert crossing or. God almighty, I'm sure you have vigilante gangs in that part of Texas as well. Like, I mean, it's quite a gauntlet to run. So, I mean, I suppose coming across from the Bahamas to Miami, it's a well-worn route as well. I mean, I'm sure the Cubans have been doing it for years. Again, a lot of those they'd have wealthy relatives who'd be funding them from the States to kind of go that route. But the idea that there's kind of Irish and, Irish British people that are using this route is an eye-opener. Although I did have contacts who were telling me about the contacts who are bringing people in across frozen rivers in Canada.
Yeah.
And, because you're able to fly into Canada, and get your visa. Like, I think it's easier to travel into Canada than it is in the US, particularly if you've already overstayed your visa previously in the United States, that you can then get across the border in Canada like your quids in until you get picked up again. People, I guess, have been doing that for years. It's one way around the paperwork,
Yeah. So, I mean, we'll keep an eye on these things. It's unusual when you hear that, like that's become, we call it like the travelling con man fraud gangs or fraud groups, and it's actually a designation that the FBI now have, and they fit in alongside, Mexican cartels. Like, it's become that much of a law enforcement issue that it gets its own name. That's when you've arrived in a criminal sense.
There's an OCG.
A specific
so
designation.
Yeah.
But we'll keep an eye on it. Thanks, Eamon.
Again, always a pleasure, Niall.
I'm Nicola Tallant, and you're watching Crime World, a podcast about criminals, drugs and the underworld in Ireland and across the globe. Make sure you subscribe to our channel and turn on notifications so you can be the first to watch all our latest episodes. You can also listen wherever you get your podcasts.